Good morning, Mr. Foley. How are you?
Very good this morning. Nice to speak to you once again.
Yes, thank you very much. How is life in Vienna right now? How is everything going?
Well, Vienna is not quite a hotspot for what is dominating the news at the moment, this coronavirus. But it's nevertheless an area where, from a social and commerce point of view, people are dramatically affected. For example, there is very strong government advice, and it's backed up with both legislation and police action that you shouldn't go out of home unless it's really important. And the only businesses which are open currently are food stores and druggery firms and chemists. So actually, if you did go out of home, there's not much to do. There's no restaurants, there's no cinemas, there's no shopping malls. Virtually everybody who can is working from home, and these are unprecedented times, both here and I know in much of the Western Europe.
The supermarkets and discounters in general, one thing they've been following these days is the e-commerce. How do they see it? Do they see it as a temporary solution, or will they go back to the traditional way when this is all over? What do you think?
E-commerce has definitely increased as a concept as a result of this set of circumstances, but it is massively overplayed in terms of how the media and various journalists are reporting it. The basic reason for that is that there's not enough capacity in the industry to be able to soak up the number of demands that consumers would like to place on it. And the model at the moment is a problem for retailers, because for food retailers, e-commerce is generally not a profitable solution. It's much more expensive to service a full e-commerce customer than it is bricks and mortar. You cannot replace in the profit that you make from the product the difference that you go to the customer's house with the customer coming to you and going around the shop and buying the shopping in the traditional way. And no retailer with its reputation wants to charge the real price during this crisis period. Otherwise, they'd be accused of penalizing people who can't get out, and generally older people who are at risk, who don't want to go into stores. So they're trying their best with their existing capacities to manage an uplift of 3 or 4 times in terms of demand. In some countries a bit higher, but they don't have the trucks, and they don't have the drivers, and they don't have the fulfillment facilities to manage anything bigger than that. And they don't want to invest because it's actually a non-profitable exercise. I believe that after all this is over, and I think that there is a time when it will be all over, that the retailers are going to hope that the customers value this service enough that they will pay more for it, and then it can be sustainable. Or the customer will return to the previous ways of shopping, and we'll be back to where we are. E-commerce is growing, but it is still a very small part of food retail.
Then, are there any grocery retailers who cannot recover from this crisis?
Grocery retailers, probably not yet. Because 2 things. First of all, grocery retailers have generally managed through this process. I wouldn't say they've done very well, but they've managed through this process in a much better way than other types of retailers have, who've simply been closed. And if you close a retail business and you keep your costs, you are slowly emptying your bank account and eventually you'll go bankrupt. So for other forms of retail, this is an absolute disaster. And remember that retail is a huge employer in every country of people, all of which are at risk or their jobs are at risk simply because the retailer isn't able to get any revenue. Some governments are helping, some are not in a position to do that, or for whatever reason are not helping, and this is a huge problem. But food retailers have generally been able to keep going, but they've kept going on the normal basis, plus some stockpiling, but stockpiling is generally of commodity type products, oil, flour, sugar, things which you're buying every day. And these are very low margin products. Plus, retailers have got huge extra costs, extra shifts, which they want to run in order to keep shifts separate. That if somebody gets infected, only one shift is isolated, as opposed to the entire staff for a store or a logistics center. Many more checks. Many of their staff are not available for work because they're in a high-risk category, or they've got high-risk relatives at home and they don't want to affect them, or they've got sick and they're off work for 2 to 3 weeks, or they've even got symptoms, which means they have to isolate for 2 to 3 weeks. So there are huge additional costs, which unfortunately are reducing the profitability of the additional sales that have been achieved. And then we are approaching the summer. And the summer, for many retailers, is a period of time when they benefit from tourists. There are going to be many less tourists this year. Some countries where tourism is a huge part of the economy of the entire country, that whole element of commerce is going to be wiped out this year. So it's a bit early to talk about food retailers going out of business, but not all the circumstances are positive, even for this branch of retailing, which has been able to keep going. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a non-food retailer, if you're selling books or fashion or products where it's not considered essential and your stores have been closed for a month, you are in desperate trouble, really desperate trouble.
I see. Mr. Foley, what are the best practices, examples of best practices of supermarkets and discounters in this period?
Shift patterns. Best practices are to separate shifts in a really quite dramatic way, where they have absolutely zero contact with one another. And these shift patterns are even staff rooms or facilities which are used by both shifts are completely disinfected between shifts, in order that there's no chance that somebody from shift 1 is able to infect somebody from shift 2. And the reason for this, and the extra cost that retailers are putting in, is that generally, if you have somebody who has the problem, who contracts this virus and gets infected, the entire shift is quarantined. And that's better, the entire shift being quarantined, than the entire store being quarantined. In logistics centers, which play a big part in food retailers' operations, the store doesn't fill itself. It comes from logistics centers. There are 3 or 4 shifts to ensure that the entire logistics center doesn't close down if one person gets infected. These are huge costs which the retailers are putting in place, and they're really being done professionally in order that they restrict the chances of multiple infections amongst their people. So whether it's adding gloves so that when you touch product and replenish shelves, it won't infect the customers, whether it's masks, whether it's screens between customers and cashiers. There's been an enormous program of protective measures at enormous cost, because imagine trying to find all the maintenance people to fit these screens and put them in place all in the space of 2 or 3 days, which many retailers have achieved. Putting hand sanitizer in the entrance to the stores in some kind of stand, all of this requires huge cost, which you can't spend 2 weeks negotiating with your supply base to get the best price. You've simply got to do it overnight, often even without a contract, and therefore you're probably paying a higher rate than if you had time to organize it. But all of this has been done by many, many retailers around Europe and Central Asia.
Mm-hmm. Are there any creative solutions did the grocery retailers do for the customer relations management?
Well, there's been a number of examples where the marketing has changed dramatically from trying to sell more product to how you can help your customer from the point of view of food preparation to ensure that you're doing that in the safest possible.
Are there any products supermarkets started to sell in the supermarket just customized for this period? Are there any new stuff you see on the supermarkets now?
All cold remedies, traditional ones, like lemons, like ginger, tea, all of those items have seen big increases where people are believing, and there is some medical guidance that makes sense to drink more, particularly warm drinks, particularly teas and acidic type products are all good at cold prevention. And this is a kind of cold that we're dealing with. I mean, it's a particularly nasty one, but it does affect the throat and your respiratory tract. So the more you drink, the more you're able to manage to keep healthy in that area. And customers have generally understood that, and you've seen big increases in those kind of products. But as far as brand new items are concerned, I haven't seen much evidence of that, to be honest.
If we talk about FMCG companies, which FMCG companies do you think were most successful during this period?
Well, those businesses who have a very good supply chain. And to be honest, there's hardly a successful large retailer, whether it's BİM in Turkey, whether it's Tesco in the UK, or Carrefour in France, or Rewe in Germany, or Aldi and Lidl around the whole of Europe. These businesses are successful because they have a good supply chain. That's a kind of critical part of running a good food retail business. And all of those businesses have been able to manage their way through this crisis because their supply chains are pretty robust. The hypermarket business, which has often been maligned in the last 5 to 10 years as being maybe a bit of a retail dinosaur, has actually done quite well in this regard, because they generally hold more stock. And this has been important to customers who don't want to shop often. They want to shop a little bit less often and buy bigger quantities. Or they're buying not just for themselves, but they're buying for relatives or friends who are at-risk categories of people. And so they're buying bigger quantities. So what all retailers have seen is they've seen a massive increase in products which are related to this set of circumstances, like I've mentioned, and they've seen less customer traffic but much higher spend per customer. And hypermarkets are a good place to do if you want to buy a big quantity of product. But in general, it's been those who've been able to get the product on the shelves for the customers, and most of the big companies around Europe and Central Asia have managed that well.
Mm-hmm. If we compare supermarkets and discount markets in this period, are there any differences between them? For example, can we say supermarkets did better than discount markets, or discount markets were more successful? What do you think?
Well, supermarkets is a bit of a general term, you know, in that you've got big ones, which have definitely done well, and you've got very small ones, convenience stores, which have not done so well until there's been, in some countries, huge restrictions on movement. And then that's the only place in which you can get to a local store. But in general, the bigger the format in the supermarket world, the better that they've done. And discounters have done particularly well because if in times of crisis you are concerned about your finances, but you need to buy more product to manage not going out, then a discounter is a good place to go. So I think the two winners are discount stores because of their value, and hypermarkets because of their ability to ensure stock levels in stress times.
Okay. When do you think this is going to be over? Can you estimate when?
I'm kind of the wrong person to ask that question to. I'm a business guy, and I would like it to be over tomorrow. The way retailers are imagining is that the level of problem is slightly different from one country to another, because the disease seemed to catch hold of different parts of the world starting at different times. But on average, the retail community is imagining this difficulty going on till at least the end of May, and then we will see. But even if at the beginning of June there's an easing of the conditions, then we're not going to go immediately back to pre-February times. There's going to be bans on international travel. There's going to be some difficulties getting importing and exporting stock. So I'm personally of the view that we are not really going to have a chance to return to any kind of normality until the end of the summer. But you know, I'm not an expert on that. I'm part of teams which are trying to manage day by day and do the best possible for customers.
How about the revenues? When we go back to normal, hopefully, if we can, do you think we will see a big increase in the revenue for the grocery retailers?
Look, there are two schools of thought here. The one is a kind of post-war party type atmosphere, which says, okay, we survived this, and maybe our values were re-evaluated, and let's enjoy life now, because you can see how Mother Nature can give you a kick, a real kick. But the other one is that if the economies of countries are hugely damaged, particularly countries where tourism or travel or moving around is a critical part, maybe it'll take much longer for people to feel confident to spend money. So, you know, whatever way you look at this, there's no real good news in it. It's just a question of how much pain there is, and that's a little bit specific from country to country. And at the moment, I'm seeing that countries with tourism as a key part of the economy, so people are earning money and they're then spending that in shops. If that doesn't happen and the tourists are not coming, that's pretty difficult. That's really pretty difficult.
Okay. Mr. Foley, thank you very much for joining us, and we are looking forward to talking to you again soon. Stay safe and keep well.
Thank you very much. You too. Best wishes. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.